interesting to start this way. And I want you to say that what you hear today, you might come away saying, none of that was very new. None of that was very new. And part of that is because I think what we're talking about is just really the gospel message itself. The words spirituality, communion, sometimes, I guess, in ways makes it a little bit foreign or strange because we're not used to that terminology. Some ways that putting a new label on it like that can help us to maybe see there is a novelty in it. And so I'm asking that you would try to listen with new ears. You know, Jesus talks about new wineskins. So in one sense, to have new ears as you listen to maybe what might seem familiar to you. And if it is familiar, maybe try to listen to it at a deeper level so that maybe touches a new place and creates a new awareness for you. Okay? But what I'd like to suggest is that an image of the Word made flesh. The Word made flesh. We can talk about ideas, especially when we're talking about the gospel, and we creatures are sometimes the worst. We get stuck in our heads with the ideas and the training and the education that we have. But the vital part of our faith is when the Word becomes flesh. Okay? So in that sense, the mystery of the Incarnation imbues all of what we're going to talk about today. If you walk away from here with new ideas, we will not have met that goal. Okay? If you walk out of here convinced that you have to change and put something into practice, then the Word is becoming flesh. Okay? So the first part of my talk is going to be a little bit more centered around the head, okay, and maybe coming into some of the concepts. And then hopefully some fruit of today will also be some concretization, some visual, some practical things. Okay? My experience having studied in Italy for 2.5 years also provides sort of a parallel. Europe loves ideas. Europe loves the philosophy. Americans love the practical, the pragmatic. And actually, John Paul II, in Novo Millennio in Aiunte, kind of observed something similar without labeling them European and American, or the Americans. He talks about the structures which Americans love, and the practices and the methods, and the more conceptual that the Europeans tend to favor. So he's telling us, as you hear all of these things, don't rush too quickly into the practical. Sometimes to enter a topic, it's best to look at the problem because most of the time our energies are focused on problem solving. So I want to present some of what I consider to be the problem, if you can put it in those terms, on a macro, a mezzo, and a micro level. Okay? What the world struggles with. Okay? Read any of the headlines, whatever the Archdiocese or our country struggles with, whatever a group struggles with. It's all essentially comes down to some of the same stuff. Some of the same stuff. Someone sent me an email, and I want to quote the email to you, or part of it. She said, I look at what's happening with the economy, and I really see it as a sign that we have lost total sense of the meaning of the common good. For example, what's good for you, the immigrant, the poor, those without a voice, is good for me and good for all. The very signs of the times seem to cry out for us to rediscover our sense of oneness. To ask ourselves how effective our decisions are in bringing about the human development of every person, the common good, versus surrendering to individual, partisan, and class interests. That may sound sort of like a political observation or a political statement, but I think it's a real insight. Okay. I drove over here from Garden Oaks. Okay, when I got in my car and got on the freeway, I entered a new world. Okay, and I was thinking about self-preservation. I was thinking about survival of the fittest. I was not thinking that the person in the car next to me was my neighbor who I'm called to love. Okay, and so much of our interactions in whatever group are often marked by that instinct. I want to call it an instinct of self-preservation, of protection. Charles Darwin, I was a pre-med student before I was a seminarian and a student of theology, and I remember well the lessons that we learned from Charles Darwin. In a world of scarce resources, only the strong survive. And we call that the survival of the fittest. Okay? And if our mentality is predominated by that fear of attack or of scarce resources, then my efforts and my energies will be towards self-preservation. Seeing the world and everyone in it as competitors to my survival. My well-being is threatened, under attack. Let's bring that to some concrete examples, maybe from your own experience in working in your department, working in the chancery system, other jobs that you've had in the secular world. Okay? Who gets paid the most? Which department gets the most resources? Who gets the most attention or affirmation? From the boss, from Cardinal DiNardo, from whoever. Who gets the best assignments? My ministry is more important than yours. My spirituality is better than yours. Mom always liked you best. My needs trump your needs. Hoarding rather than sharing. And the one who saves his life will lose it. Okay, so it's more like a final wrap-up thing. On some level, I think of it as terms of sibling rivalry. Okay? So even though I've talked about the threats out in the world, on some level it goes back to a feeling like there's not enough. And I've got to get mine before you get yours. And so competition tends to mark our relationships if we stay in the natural. If we don't make a conscious effort to bring about a habit of thinking of others, of love of neighbor, of collaboration and cooperation. And we don't just reduce ourselves down to the level of the animal part of us that Darwin observed about all the different species. Survival of the fittest. So the problem, I think, if you, like I said, go back to the global level, is that we've got to think of our self-interests over and against the third world countries, the developing nations. Okay? And so there's predatory business practices. Okay? Whether it's militaristic things that are happening around the globe, everywhere, it's usually that sort of me and my group are in a competition or in some kind of warfare against the other. So that, I think, is a way of naming the problem. It's certainly an oversimplification, but it sort of sets the stage and helps us understand what is being offered to us by, in first place, John Paul II in the document, which I'll go into a little bit about, Novum Millennium Unite, and how that document influenced the Archdiocesan pastoral